It's June 26th, Friday, a little past 8 p.m. I'm journalist Daisuke Tsuda. With the cooperation of the Goethe-Institut, Tokyo, we are holding this broadcast, #Studio 202X. This is Series 2 and Part 4, the final part. And the theme is Democracy and the Arts. That is the theme for today, and we'll be debating this. This time, Series 2 itself is about thinking about democracy and cultural support. Arts and culture are the foundations supporting democracy. With the COVID-19 contagion, the importance of arts and culture are being recognized. And in response to this time, we want to talk about the practical side and also the researcher's side. We want to hear from both sides. I would like to introduce today's guests. The governor of Aichi Prefecture, Governor Hideaki Omura. Yes, good evening. This is Hideaki Omura speaking. And from Kyoto University, Professor. Her specialty is cultural exchange and cultural policy, Professor Mayuko Sano. Yes, this is Sano speaking. Nice to be with you today. And today, from Germany, from the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, we have the Minister of Culture and Media, Minister Carsten Brosda, taking part through a video. And we'd like to go right into the debate. And Minister Brosda is not joining us live. This is a pre-recorded video. I interviewed him beforehand. In the case of Germany, it's a federation, and the cultural policy is different by state. And among them, Hamburg, together with Berlin, is placing quite a lot of emphasis on cultural policies and moving forward with specific measures. In the pre-interview, I was able to ask him for details. So first, if you could please take a look at Minister Brosda's interview, and after that, let's go into the discussion. We'd like to start the video, please. And Minister Brosda, thank you for joining us. My first question to you is, with COVID... yes, Minister Brosda, thank you for joining us. My first question to you is, for the years 2019 and 2020, you're in charge of an estimated 330 million euros. That's the culture and media budget for Hamburg. And you're in charge of that. And with COVID-19, yes, we have some technical problems, and we'd like to play the video once again. Excuse me. Minister Brosda, thank you for joining us. First, I wanted to ask you, Minister Brosda, for the years 2019 and 2020, you're in charge of an estimated 330 million euros, the culture and media budget for Hamburg. And with the COVID-19, countries across the world have taken a hit. Especially in the sector of arts and culture, the damage has been especially large. The virus has the power to paralyze the city's cultural functions, and the museums, libraries, concert halls, the cultural activities in the city, the framework itself, due to COVID-19, is being forced to change. And we need to come up with countermeasures. And based on all of this, Minister Brosda, when the threat of COVID-19, when it hit the world, various countries, and drew close to Germany and Hamburg, what first came to mind? First, regarding the numbers, You mentioned 330 million euros. That's the number per year. So for 2019 and 2020, the number would be twice as large. And what first came to mind was, we have to immediately start support. From quite an early stage, we knew what this would mean for the culture of Hamburg. Meeting people, creating works together with someone, artistic interventions. All these things and experiences could no longer be permitted due to COVID-19. In mid-March, we made the decision to close public facilities and spaces. We could not continue the same way as before. And people involved in culture and cultural facilities had to be supported. That soon became clear. In just a few days, we increased our cultural budget by 25 million euros for immediate support and benefit payments. Next, we considered support for general businesses. But what seemed even more important was not just discussing how to overcome this crisis economically, but what would we be losing? That had to be clarified. Without public spaces for artistic activities, what would we lose? In an open democracy, we must hold such discussions and learn from the weeks and months of loss that we experienced. Not just the economic aspects, but the socio-cultural aspects of art must be preserved more than ever. That's the kind of thing I was thinking. Could you give us more specifics on your art and cultural support, on the contents? I think there are various ways to offer support or compensate people for loss. For example, events are cancelled, so offering a certain percentage of expected revenues, or for staff working at theatres. Part of their salaries could be compensated, and how much should we compensate? Or rent. Venues for events have to keep on paying the rent, but they have no income, so we could offer rent compensation. Various countries in the West have different compensation schemes, and they're all different. So what's Hamburg's compensation scheme? I apologize for going into a bit of detail, but first, there is support in place for the whole of Germany. First, there was so-called immediate support. For small projects, we offered subsidies to compensate for losses in their projects. Hamburg offered additional support. For individual projects, a flat 2,500 euros. For medium-sized businesses, a maximum of 30,000 euros. These are pure subsidies that do not have to be paid back, paid as immediate support. We also have loans with special conditions. On a federal level, or through special financial institutions, cultural businesses can borrow under especially advantageous conditions. Through this, cultural organizations were able to survive and not fall into default. And there were measures for switching staff to shorter operating hours, which actually happened a lot. And compensation was paid from unemployment insurance, paying 60% to 67% of wages, a maximum of 87% paid by the government. Decreased personnel expenses is for cultural facilities a big relief. Personnel expenses are a big cost factor in the field of culture too, and thanks to the government covering this, staff did not have to be let go, making a rational solution possible. Other than that, as Hamburg City, if the city was lending the space, then the rent was exempted. Fees that would normally be charged were also exempted, so that in this time of emergency, we made it possible for as many operators as possible to stay on. In addition, for the cultural industry, we introduced special support measures. That's because we knew that even if people received loans, after Corona, they probably would not be able to pay them back. Art is by definition not for making profit. Art is not for making money, and with the precondition of receiving subsidies, cultural projects take place. So we decided to create a new model of subsidies that did not need to be paid back. The target here is theatres in the city run by the private sector. But numerous other cultural facilities, clubs, festivals, and events are also within scope. If there are losses, first, they should utilize all the possible support measures, and if that is still not enough, then Hamburg, the city, will cover the rest. That's how we support them. In the case of public cultural facilities, again, after utilizing various support measures, at the end of the fiscal year, the balance of revenues and expenditures is confirmed, and if there are losses, they will be covered. The first immediate support measures at the beginning were at a time when absolute nothing could be done. Now we're at the stage for discussing how to make this develop. Now, even if theatres reopen, only about 20% or 30% of tickets will be sold, and the remaining seats will be empty. Even so, we are discussing ways to make the performance possible and to cover the losses. That's what we're discussing now. This afternoon, I have a telephone conference with the theatre administrators of all private sector theatres in the city, and it's the same for music events. We're now preparing a temporary infrastructure for getting through the summer. Perhaps we'll use open-air theatres. In this way, we're trying to identify what we can do to hold events. And the third is, as our unique support measure in the fields of performance, music and art, we will provide the extra to make the production possible. Today, various possibilities are shrinking. So we're trying to show consideration so artists can continue. This is just a collection of individual small-scale relief measures. Other than this, we have federal-level support. In the case of Germany, culture is not the jurisdiction of the central government. But last week, the central government decided to contribute 1 billion euros for culture, and I plan to get some of that for Hamburg. This work is taking numerous tools, fitting them together like a puzzle. But overall, I think there's widespread awareness of culture and shared at an extremely early stage. Your detailed explanations have given me better understanding. Thank you. To explain the situation in Japan, you are way ahead of us in supporting arts and culture. And in Japan, we do not have the detailed support measures like Germany in Japan. The reason for this, the politicians say, is that it's not just arts and culture having a hard time. Restaurants and other industries are also hard hit by the virus. So they cannot give arts and culture special treatment. And cultural support tends to be on the back burner. In Germany, I'm sure that other industries are also having a hard time taking a hit with COVID-19. Have there been discussions about arts and culture getting too much preferential treatment in Hamburg or in Germany? We have not had such discussions. In Germany, there has been exchange of opinions of the general public, but there have been no discussions over arts and culture getting too much preferential treatment. The support measures that I just introduced, for example, benefits for shorter operating hours, exist in other industries too, and have nothing to do with the industry or status of employees. Out of a variety of support measures, some are for arts and culture, and again, that's important. Hamburg or other major cities like Berlin, where Mr. Klaus Lederer is very active, have taken this position from an early stage. Culture has long been considered something more than just culture. The cultural industry, in particular the performance industry, is most seriously hit and will continue to be so for a long time. First in, last out. The conventional problem with culture has come to the surface. Secondly, looking at various types of culture, even without the impact of COVID-19, without subsidies, they could not exist. They are in a unique situation. We know that. Private sector grant organizations lack funds now, and they say they cannot pay. Normally, entrance fees to events can give us profits, but today we cannot hold those events. What I think is decisively important is, and it took me these past few weeks to realize this, is that cultural places and culture has important meaning for society, and the country Germany has realized just how important this is. Culture is an important place where our social diversity is formed, a place where extreme forms of freedom and positions can be drawn out. In our daily lives filled with rules, what seems useless is actually culture. The scenarios provided there may not be your own experiences, but they enable you to think about other options. Now, suddenly, we cannot do that. This loss experience is probably something all of us have experienced. What we've realized here is, perhaps in the past, we took culture for granted and not value it that much, but socially, it's worth taking another look. I think we can say we've reached a conclusion here. It's not like all over Germany this debate is going on with the same level of passion, but at least in the big city areas, it's seen as an important discourse. In the big cities, many people are working in cultural creative industries and are becoming strongly aware of what role they play in our society. That's why, in this area, we have to seriously tackle this, because society relies on culture. But what should culture do? It's not for us to decide. Culture is a place of inspiration and stimulus, and we need to make that clear. Over the past few weeks in Germany, people are starting to say culture too is essential for society. Areas essential for maintaining our social system must be saved. I don't like that way of putting it because it sounds like art has a certain role. I believe arts and culture are important, essential for us to coexist in society. They're important, even more than maintaining society. That's why, right now, people are redefining the meaning of living together in society. As the debate continues, I think we need to learn from our lessons from our current experience. To do that, cultural intervention by artists is needed, and I think this awareness is clearly coming to life. I am not excessively valuing culture. Last week, the central government announced a comprehensive countermeasures budget of 13 billion euros. Part of this, just part, 1 billion euros will be for the arts, so it's not like there's excessive spending for the arts. I see. What you just said, what's really important is, because of COVID-19, people are under lockdown and have to stay home. And they've realized the social importance of arts and culture that we come into direct contact with. In Germany, the lockdown is gradually being lifted in stages, and I think activities are starting up again. After the lifting of the lockdown for the arts and culture industry, what will be different? And regarding these differences, what discussions are going on? Could you let us know? How are things different? I think it's too early to tell. We're now at the stage of making various preparations. A few weeks ago, art galleries and museums started opening again, and movie theatres are about to open, but not many yet. And there are no new movies that can be shown on a nationwide level. That's the situation. In Hamburg from July 1st, we hope to restart theatre performances. However, the theatres are still closed today, and the Elbphilharmonie and other concert halls and large institutions are the same. Restarting by the end of August looks difficult, but we're carefully fumbling forward in our preparations. I'd like to switch gears here. The German lockdown was limited. We did not go as far as imposing a curfew. We were told to decrease contact with others, maintain distance, and limit going out to a bare minimum. But we were not forced to stay home. Theatres, concert halls, clubs, and others did close. Performances were cancelled. Concert halls were closed. But now, we're starting to move in the opposite direction. Soon, following the criteria, the lockdown will gradually be lifted. When holding events, we will decide rules, maintain a distance of 1.5 meters, sanitize thoroughly, and monitor people coming in and going out. At these events, we also need to maintain records of participants. As long as we decide such rules and keep them, we can hold events. If we do not, the risk of infection is too high and we cannot hold the events. What we're discussing now is, for example, at a hall that can accommodate 800 people, what will it be like if only 200 people attend? Will it be viable as a concert? What will be the atmosphere in the hall? Will the audience feel the energy on stage? If to prevent infection, the players or performers have to maintain their distance, can they sing or perform? What happens when there's distance between the musical instruments or singers? What we call new normal. Artistically, is it possible? That's what we're trying out through trial and error. Hamburg's large public opera houses and theatres are also thinking about such things. In September, our new season will begin. Can the programs be executed as they are? Can we hold the opening night? Do we need to review the works? Under current conditions, what is possible? With these preconditions, will new expressions be born? At the Deutsche Schauspielhaus, one of the foremost theatres in Hamburg, rehearsals have begun. To maintain distance, they're wearing things that look like corsets or swimming rings. They look like swimming rings that children put on, about 1.5 meters large. When an actor wears it around his or her waist, this will naturally create distance around him, so they'll wear them during rehearsals. Using props like this, we're trying to see what we can do. Under the current circumstances, we're trying this and that and moving forward step by step. Having said so, we're not trying out everything and anything. If we do that, the contagion may spread again and we may be back to square one. That would be truly worrying. But regarding events from late summer to autumn, for example, the Kampnagel International Summer Festival or the Leperbahn Music Festival or Film Festival, Hamburg City plans to hold these events. Under pandemic conditions, what will cultural projects be like? Trying that out is also one of our aims. To create our new normal, there are what we are doing through trial and error. When vaccines or other medical possibilities are ready, culture, which is essential in our lives, how do we bring it back to life? That is what we are seeking, because with culture, you need to actually touch it directly.
Thank you. In terms of talking about seeking options, the city of Berlin had an initiative where, under this coronavirus situation, they supported online streaming of, for example, theatrical performances, music or club music, and so on. With this coronavirus pandemic, there's been an increasing need for people to be able to enjoy art online. Since it's quite difficult for people to go to real venues in large numbers like they did before the coronavirus situation, and as they cannot be in a crowded environment to enjoy the performing arts, moving to online performances looks like a possible option. Is there any initiative that the city of Hamburg has done or is thinking to support that? Yes, we supported that definitely. In the first step, though, money was not so much the number one necessary option because many were involved anyway. There were other support measures. In fact, the coronavirus pandemic and the restrictions have given us a real boost in expanding the potential for use of online dissemination, and a lot of things have happened there. Innovative new projects have emerged, and we have certainly helped one way or the other to make this possible. I find this to be a very positive development. We should use this online space much more culturally and artistically than in the past. Just last week in Hamburg, we organized the third edition of the Virtual Reality Hamburg or VR Ham Festival. This focuses on how VR technologies can be used artistically. And it's not just about using VR as an administration tool, but as an artistic means of expression. And of course, this year, it was a good idea to let it all take place virtually on the VR platform. Until last year, we still had a live event venue. But this year, the festival went completely online because it is also about digital and virtual art. These are options that we want to expand further, but I think there are two things to look out for. One thing is that just taking something that is analog and uploading it online is not enough. It can be helpful in the short term because it shows us how much stronger the live experience is compared to the virtual reality version. But I find it much more exciting to see digital technologies create a unique artistic experience. This should not be a one-to-one translation. It should be the development of new artistic strategies in the use of digital techniques. I think we have a lot of possibilities. There are things we can learn from Japan and other cultures that have gone further than our artistic scene here. And the second thing is that the creative industries have made great use of digital technology in the past few weeks in order to reach out directly to citizens. A lot of things are now provided online very easily, quickly, and also free of charge. That means at some point in time, we will come into a discussion of whether it is actually possible to take an entrance fee for a digital art experience. We need to discuss how to build the technological systems. Even if we replace something with a digital version, we must make sure that the income that we had previously would not be taken away through the system. Just because something is digital, it does not mean everything is for free. For me as a user, the money should not only go to the large platforms from America and China, the system should be such that people who provide local art and culture can also get their income. And so both the federal government and the city must think harder about how these support strategies and models can be strengthened. Could I ask you to talk about your book? Early this year, you published The Art of Democracy, and you wrote it at this particular time, at the same time as carrying out your duties as minister, and you chose the theme of democracy and art. What prompted you to write it? What was the reason or the motivation? The motivation, on the one hand, is that writing helps me organize my thoughts. I can already tell that I work better when I have an idea of the basis of which ideas I work with. Instead of keeping the ideas in your head, it helps to organize your thoughts by getting them out into text. A text helps to bring thoughts into a structure and help you go through a terrain more clearly. And secondly, regarding the content, I believe we have already seen the perception of cultural policy go through a change in recent years. I believe you have already experienced it firsthand. Cultural policy is no longer just the task of ensuring that metropolises can compete with each other, boasting how your own city has a great festival, great theater, a great concert hall, and get into a war of talents, and then talk about how the quality of cultural life in your city is high. In today's society, we now have a lot of cultural questions to discuss in our societies. These questions have to do with creating a basic social consensus on how we actually want to live together in freedom and diversity, democracy and political openness. Because in many parts of society in Germany, we have discussions about how openness and the detraditionalization of our life in today's culturally diverse societies has become a source of stress for an increasing number of people. And these people are trying to go back to the simple stories of an allegedly homogeneous, nationally shaped, and more uniform German culture. And I believe that this is a wrong path that we must oppose, because it is precisely the openness, the diversity, the freedom of different cultural positions that are essential to modern society. The German philosopher Adorno expresses this as a society in which people are able to be different without fear. And if cultural politicians do not get involved in this debate, but if they believe that it is enough to build landmark buildings and tell the story of the wonderful quality of life in cultural metropolises, then they are missing out on an important task that they have. I believe that right now It is the task of cultural policy to talk about cultural diversity and the exchange between different artistic and cultural positions. By doing so, we can keep societies free and keep democracy alive. And that is exactly the role that cultural policy and politicians should play. People may have stayed away a little from debates on cultural policy, but now it is gaining a lot of attention. Are artists currently given a place to point out contradictions in society and provide inspirational stimulus? I ask myself if I am providing with such a space, and dare I say we have to provide them with a space. This is not just something that we as a society have to endure, but something that we politicians should strive for. Art not only has to inspire us, art can also irritate us. Art can also hurt, and thus it gives us the opportunity to deal with ourselves. And this freedom of art is currently being questioned. That is why cultural policy needs to highlight which strategies are available to secure this freedom and to make a few suggestions there. That was the aim of the book. Well, this book describes, as you just said, the important role of arts and culture, which now many members of the public have become aware of under the coronavirus pandemic. But even from the time when you were writing this book last year, you were saying that socially and politically culture has an important role to play, and that it helps form basic consensus on freedom and diversity. And you describe art and culture as the engine of democracy. But last year, we did not have this crisis that was brought on by the coronavirus. And in a way, the coronavirus crisis sort of proved what you wrote in the book. It's almost as if the book was predicting what would happen, like a prophecy. Can I ask you what you think of this? Well, it helps me to have thought about it. I believe that much of what I have described abstractly or described in relation to other areas of discussion have now become highlighted through this coronavirus crisis. But I believe that the circumstances that this virus will bring us over the coming years may not have anything in common with the topics of the past. So the other questions, what does solidarity actually mean in society if we assume that everyone will be held personally responsible for managing the situation? What does it mean for society for us to live together? Also the relationship between state and market and society. And I have had a lot of learnings about this in the past few weeks and months. How should the relationship be revisited? And when we are faced with a global crisis, how do we actually cooperate internationally and across borders? All of these are questions that are waiting for answers, just like the question of the value of culture. And they have become even more of a focus through the experience of the coronavirus pandemic. Arts and culture and public spaces which serve as venues for them need to be considered in a special way. This is because art and culture has proven to be particularly vulnerable. Working in the area of arts and culture, I got to understand very well what this kind of claim, which we make repeatedly, would be looked at with a little bit of a smile, questioning what do we mean when we say that the area of arts and culture is particularly fragile or vulnerable, and why would make that kind of claim? No one asks those questions anymore. It's because everyone has learned. The task we are facing now is to keep holding on to this feeling and take it into the discussions of how we want to shape society after COVID-19, or even want to shape society with coronavirus. We can learn some lessons and draw conclusions from it. And you are right that I would now defend much of what I wrote in the book with even much more force. I would have done that regardless of the coronavirus. But the coronavirus crisis shows us again in a special way why we need these kind of spaces, why do we need to talk about them, and how do we actually want to live with each other. Instead of following past traditions or customs, people living together in towns, villages, and a country full of diversity must agree together what are the values and ideas of our living together. We need artistic interventions and experiences. I think we have realized that through the coronavirus outbreak. During the weeks of the coronavirus pandemic, we could only hold this discussion online, and we noticed that something is missing. We also needed the free, wild accessibility of rooms to actually step into. And bringing them back will be one of the major political tasks of the coming years. You discussed the vulnerability of culture just now. And the vulnerable arts and culture have come under attack for the past 10 to 20 years. And that has been a big trend for the last 2 decades. And during that time, I think the freedom of art has come under attack not only from political rightists, but also from political leftists. And this could potentially lead into a debate on political correctness. But I believe we are seeing both leftists and rightists increasingly trying to suppress the freedom of art. Could I ask you your thoughts on that and whether or not you see a change in the situation through the coronavirus pandemic? I believe there are 3 factors that could jeopardize the freedom of art. We know one thing in general. We have a situation in which we have to work on to make sure that we have an economic framework that allows art events to be organized. I think that is a very important and essential point because freedom is of course restricted if the means and resources are not available. The main line of argument in recent years have been very strong with rightist groups, and that was certainly the main threat, at least in Germany. We have those who said that we have taken this too far with diversity, with the freedom and openness of society, so we should go back to a form that is more in line with our national traditions. I think that is a discussion that is also being held in many other countries, but I consider them fatal and consider it an essential task to oppose them. Because this could limit the freedom of art when it is said that you can only produce art that corresponds to your own national tradition. And I would honestly find it difficult to define what your own national tradition is. Tradition results from the diversity of people from different cultures coming together and coexisting in one place, and we have to negotiate together how we want to discuss it. And the third area is the area which I would not call leftist because it has nothing to do with left or right. But of course, we have discussions related to identity politics. This is a discussion on whether I may take a position in the artistic discourse when I do not represent the characteristics of this position. Simply put, can I play the role of a black person if I'm not black myself? This is a discussion that we also have in many places, and these are legitimate questions. But that has a different meaning from the question of freedom that we are discussing. We are discussing here the question of restricting other people's freedom of expression. This freedom of expression absolutely has to be protected. But of course, we need to take up the issue of justice because many groups in our societies do not have the same freedom of expression as the proverbial old white men, at least in Western societies. That is, we have to ensure that black persons have the opportunity or freedom to play the role of a black person, to bring their positions, especially against the background of Black Lives Matter, the discussion that we currently have. We must ensure they can make their positions in a society become visible, audible, and tangible. And this is a point we have to regulate in society. We have to decide the rules, provide financial resources so each can state their positions from their own perspectives. When you think about it this way, this is no longer a discussion around freedom. If this issue is handled as a debate about freedom, it can become a limitation of art. And so I think we have to prevent that from happening by asking the question correctly. This question concerns a very relevant topic, and all of these questions have been put into perspective in the past few weeks. Rightists hardly appear on the surface anymore. Rightists are discussed in German public opinion because they say the coronavirus is not that dangerous and it's all a conspiracy. But most of the population do not believe them. And the questions of identity are, of course, currently overlaid by the feeling that we have to show solidarity with each other in a society, to not get along as individual groups, but to work together in order to face the issue. If we do it well, we certainly have the chance to get out these current debates at one point or another with the opportunity to reposition ourselves. Instead of going back to the times of tension before the coronavirus, I look at this with some hope that we will be able to find how we need a common understanding in our society in order to be able to communicate that we can be different. It's not enough just to say we are different. We have to agree on finding something in common from that difference, and by doing so, we protect the difference. If we can work together to realize this, then I think the two lines of conflict that we have can be worked out and the freedom of art can be secured. As time is running out, my next question will be the last one. Minister Brosda, you mentioned solidarity. So I'd like to ask you about the possibilities of solidarity and the ability of arts and culture to support it. In order to fight the coronavirus globally, you may need global solidarity. And I believe one of the last points you mentioned was the importance of majority groups showing solidarity with minority groups so they can build together a society that works well as a whole while allowing each of them to be different. And in trying to build or to connect people in solidarity, the role that arts and culture can play is getting renewed attention right now. So I'd like to ask you about that, and what do you think can be done to promote it through the arts and culture policies of the government, state governments, and cities? Please, could you tell me your thoughts? That's an exciting question. I think this topic alone would need another round of discussion. I believe art can do anything. But we need to be careful against trying to force art to do something. In Germany, we always talk about how culture has an ability to create solidarity, and we speak of art and culture as a cement of society that holds society together. It's a terrible cliche. To be honest, I am being rather unkind when I say this. And this is because I think that art and culture can do opposite things. Art can tear something apart, it can also split or disconnect. And it shows us what is not working well in a society in order to give us the opportunity to talk about it. So now we come back to the beginning of discussion about why promoting arts and culture is still so difficult under the current pandemic. If we want to promote art and culture, we must maintain faith in it, even if the outcome to society of that grant or subsidy cannot be described. We have to support cultural and artistic activities. We have to promote that cultural and artistic process so that everyone can have access to artistic experiences. We need to lower the entry barriers and thresholds to culture as much as possible so that no one in society would be made to feel irrelevant to cultural offerings. For example, some people think that museums have social codes or rules that must be followed, and as they do not fit those codes, they feel they cannot participate in the programs there. We must work on removing these thresholds. But we must never specify or dictate what the cultural content should be. For example, we should not say things like, you should do this kind of art because it increases social solidarity. If we do that, we limit artistic freedom. What I have to do is to acknowledge the value and strive to provide opportunities for art to be discussed freely. By doing so, we get to find meaning in our living together, in social solidarity, and what the basis of common values and visions of our society can be. Culture can inspire us to do this. Culture, in the end, does not depend on a purpose. It's actually purposeless. I cannot say what I'm doing it for, but it can be incredibly useful in helping us discuss social meaning without knowing beforehand what the result is. For those of us doing state cultural policy, that's what we have to endure. Of course, we always want to be able to put labels and know what happens to the money we spend. But I always say to the parliament that gives me the money, I don't know, I only know that something is going to happen. So let's wait and see what happens next, and then we can talk about it and get smarter for talking about it. I think that's the point we have to endure. But I know that for some of us, there's a long way to go to land at this point. But if we can endure that, we will have a chance to get through to freedom of art, a deep understanding of the meaning of living together in society. But we can never say that art has to do something to get results. It would be wrong to expect that. Art does not have to do anything, and exactly because it doesn't have to do anything, it has the chance to do everything. I'm sorry we went slightly over time, but your talk was very clear and very inspiring. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion.
Gut.
Right, thank you. So that was Minister Carsten Brosda, the Minister of Culture and Media from the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg. And Minister Brosda was born in 1974. I was born in 73, so he's 1 year younger than I am. And what's more, he's written a book, The Art of Democracy. And he used to be a journalist. And now he's the Minister for Culture. So he has a similar background to me. And we're almost the same age. And the interview itself, it covered a wide variety of aspects of the cultural policy of Hamburg. And he gave us a lot of details, and I realized he's thinking about a lot of different things. And what left an impression with me was, so in Japan, we hear reports about how Germany started early without wandering around. But from the inside, what would be good support? And for things like the performing arts, how should they be supported? It's very difficult. And he seemed to be giving it a lot of thought as he came up with Germany's or Hamburg's cultural policies, and learning that he too was having a hard time was something valuable to me. And in the interview, Minister Brosda was saying, there are several things that left an impression. He said, culture, how important is it for society? Lots of people now recognize this thanks to COVID-19. And towards the end, he said that culture links people, but it also splits people up. And it also invites discussion. Culture has the power to do that. And that's why the government, politicians, should not stick their nose in regarding culture. And what I recalled was Governor Omura. So Aichi Prefecture will provide the funds, but will not stick their nose in. He often says that. That's what the governor says very often. And Governor Omura, listening to Minister Brosda's interview, what did you think? Yes, like you said, Tsuda-san, I had the same kind of impression. I thought in Germany, the country has 50 billion euro, and they have concerts, and with COVID-19 you cannot hold concerts or exhibitions, and 50 billion euro, 6 trillion yen. He decided on this, and I thought he did this without wondering about it at all. But listening, I realized that there were lots of opinions, lots of discussions, and wondering what to do, and arts and culture for Germany, for mankind, are necessary. And I frankly think I heard that from the minister. It felt very refreshing. That's my impression. And I wanted to ask the governor, Omura-san, on May the 1st, in the press conference, this is what you said. Culture and arts for the people's activities and lives are essential. And watching the West have good support for arts and culture, Japan should look at that and try to do the same. And you talked about Aichi's. You announced Aichi Prefecture's actual support for arts and culture. And as you said, Omura-san, Germany is a federation. They have a lot of budget by state. And in Japan, everything is centralized. And the cultural policy is covered by the Agency for Cultural Affairs. So you cannot compare the two countries. However, Aichi Prefecture, I think, is placing a lot of emphasis on culture and arts. And it has its own unique support for artists who are having a hard time. It looks like you're offering support that is actually useful. And this support in Aichi Prefecture for arts and culture, could you please give us your explanations about this? The amount on May the 1st, I talked about this, and about a week before that, in late April, Aichi's unique COVID-19 countermeasures and support for arts and culture, we announced this. And money for supporting arts and culture activities, artists who are engaging in this. So the business continuity cash payments by the central government are also in place, and people, 200,000 yen, individuals 100,000 yen are provided by the government, and that is, we have the budget for this for 2 million yen, and for a variety of artists within the prefecture, for a variety of cultural facilities, like galleries, museums, people who come up with video works and distribute them online, we will offer them support. And for the local TV stations, together with them, such cultural activities, creating something that introduces them, 72 million yen. So that comes to 640 million yen for culture alone. That's what we came up with. And together with that, in Aichi Prefecture, we have our museum, and we also have a porcelain museum for ceramics. And we also have funds for getting the works of art, for obtaining them. In 3 years, about 100 million yen is used. So that we can continue to obtain and store the art. And this time we have a special framework. In 3 years, 100 million yen starting this year for 2020, 21, 22, for modern art, for contemporary art, 100 million yen. And in the 3 years, we want to purchase the art. For young artists living in Japan, the contemporary artworks will be purchased this fiscal year. How should I put this? Maybe about 60% is already booked for this year. For about 30 young artists, we will be purchasing works of art. And we're moving forward with the procedures for this. So for arts and culture, this kind of support. The central government too is offering support. And in June, there's the second supplementary budget, and the Cultural Affairs Agency is also involved. And in the first supplementary budget in April, there were not many measures to support art. But on our side, we wanted to be early, and we've been tackling this from an early stage. Plus, in June, we announced in the cultural activities, culture and arts and sports activities, in Aichi, we have the Arts Center, and we have the concert hall, and we have the Aichi Gym. And the usage fees, we have cut them by 50%. That's another measure we came up with. So we're doing whatever we can to offer support. And lastly, and as we heard in Tsuda-san's interview, it's not like arts and culture are getting preferential treatment. In Japan, some people say it's happening, but what's happening in Germany? And the minister said, no, people do not consider arts and culture to get special treatment. And this time, with COVID-19, with this major crisis, it's not special treatment, but this time, this is a damage larger than the time of the Lehman crisis. It's happening all over the world. And in particular, this time, there's been a big shock in industries like transportation, tourism and leisure, and restaurants, and hotels, inns, and performance art and concerts. The kinds of industries that gather people together. And the services industry has taken a direct hit. It's been shocking. And that being the case, the arts and culture relations or live music spots, they're having a really hard time. And we need to place emphasis and make sure they get support. I think that is necessary. And that's what we're doing right now.
So I think that means arts and culture is part of the package for the services industry. And the characteristic of the industry is such that it gets impacted very strongly. And because it is very important for Aichi Prefecture, that's why you are offering special support. Well, rather than for the sake of industries in Aichi, we have a major city, Nagoya City in Aichi. And I'm sure that the situation is the same for all of Japan. But these metropolitan kind of activities do need to be supported. Because these industries really cannot go around their business in this situation. And people will start to go away from them. And even if we say we can resume activities, they may not be able to restart activities. And so for areas that are particularly impacted, we do make sure that we have proper support. For transportation industries, for the hotels and accommodations, we are providing support. We did a tourism campaign this morning We discussed it so that we will be able to prepare in time for the summer holidays. We're doing this ahead of the national Go-To campaign. And we will be providing support up to 10,000 yen per person for people who want to visit these places. And so, yes, arts and culture is part of the support that we are providing for a wide variety of industries. Thank you. Professor Sano, you heard Minister Brosda's interview and Governor Omura's comment just now. These are two people who are involved in cultural policy on a practical level, and they have made some very memorable comments. So listening to their two comments on cultural policy and providing support for culture, now what are your thoughts? Well, listening to both of them, I thought that the underlying assumption is that the world is facing a similar problem. And I was reminded of that as I was listening to them. You hear of the problems through the daily news, but to hear that from people who are directly involved in forming policies, reminded me how we are all sharing the same problem in the same era. After the coronavirus pandemic occurred, we wondered if the border controls would never be the same again. Now we're starting to see them open up, and sometimes we're comparing countries against other countries. Cultural policies were also compared in similar fashion. But listening to both of you, I thought on a very abstract level, there was already an issue of support for arts and culture, which has been here for a long time, but there's been renewed focus on it because of the current situation. What about the theaters that can only take in fewer audiences than in the past? We have some very concrete, specific problems. You hear that from relevant stakeholders. You hear that from the comments of Governor Omura. And you heard a similar message from Minister Brosda. So we are all facing a common problem. And with this program, with the support of Goethe-Institut and Tsuda-san yourself, I'm really grateful for your having created this opportunity to talk about it. And following along the same lines, I noticed how both guests mentioned how you are really wondering how to go about providing support for arts and culture. You are also struggling and trying out, exploring options. You never hesitated without thought to provide support. So you were wondering what to do. It's not like you never hesitated and thought about what is good. Now, I think the one bad habit of history is that we tend to think that it's a good thing to be providing support for arts and culture, and we tend to think that in the Western world is more advanced. They spend more on supporting arts and culture, and people never doubt that to be true. And so we try to make comparisons with that assumptions. We say that Japan is lagging far behind. That's why we need to go and get more funding. So this has been a tendency for the people in this country to fall into. But now we're seeing renewed focus onto this issue. And with the coronavirus pandemic, people here are saying, oh, Germany was so fast in providing support for arts and culture. That is so great. And that has been just highlighted in the context of saying Japan is not doing a good job. I think it's a great idea to learn what is working and then draw reference from it. But I would like to stop ourselves from trying to copy something exactly and to force ourselves into doing it. So you said that they did not get preferential treatment. But you have to save all the industries and all areas. But you must never leave behind arts and culture. The guests had that conviction and they carried out the policies with conviction. I think we can learn a lot from what Minister Brosda and Governor Omura said, and that has been very encouraging. I really think on a daily basis how when we talk about supporting arts and culture, people are very short-sighted and only look in the near future. But if you only look at the short-term future, then you end up losing. If you ask a person, would you prefer to get food tomorrow or get to go to a concert, and you only have two options, it's very hard for a person to say he or she would choose going to the concert. So in that context, how do you get people to say that art and culture should not be left behind? It has to be part of all of the other areas. A society that has that kind of perspective is really thinking of the long term, what we cannot afford to lose. Rather than being short-sighted and saying, do we need it tomorrow, they have a more long-term view of something that should continue 100 years in future. And I think that is one thing that I would make a comparison on. So I do have a lot of questions to ask Governor Omura. But listening to the two guests right now, I felt that the long-term perspective needs to be shared more among people. And I think that is the task that we have to face right now. Thank you. So based on what Professor Sano said just now, Governor Omura, culture cannot yield results in the real short term. There are a lot of cultural programs that you do in Aichi Prefecture where you get young artists to take part. Sometimes that artist may become a really famous figure 20 years in future. So that's why you need a longer-term perspective, a mid-term to long-term perspective in helping them. But the difficult thing of the bureaucratic office is that you only get single-year budgets. So how do you manage that? In a coronavirus kind of a crisis, it might be difficult to come up with emergency support. How would you go about tackling that issue? Well, it's exactly as Professor Sano said and what you said, Mr. Tsuda. We in the bureaucratic office and in administrations and also businesses do tend to be tied to a single-year budget and showing results on a year-to-year basis. So we do need to make sure we do a good job in the short term, but we also need another perspective. I believe that arts and culture, I think these are equal to the lives of people. In order for people to be humane and be a person, you need arts and culture. It's not something additional to economic activities. It should enjoy the same position as or emphasis as economic activities. Because each and every one of us is different. It's not like we can be replaced completely by artificial intelligence or computers. Every one of us is different. And in order for that to be themselves, to be able to assert what they are, I think an accumulation of all of that is what shapes arts and culture. And so in order for people to be themselves, well, culture is a reflection of each and every person. And so we should put an emphasis on or cherish people going about their lives and being themselves.
So I am me. I am like this. You need to send that message out. You want to be understood by people. And based on that, for the first time, you're a human being. So you need to carefully, we need to carefully and properly set our sights on this and engage in our activities. I think that's necessary. Otherwise, our museums, our art galleries, the central government and we local government, the administration all over Japan, we have a lot of such facilities, but we need to have that kind of perspective as we operate these facilities and hand it on to the next generation. For us living today, that's our role, I think. Regarding what the governor just said, listening to him, this left a big impression on me. And what I wanted to ask was, with the governor, I met the governor first 3 years ago in summer. So I was the artistic director of the Aichi Triennale, and we chatted for a little while. And 3 years ago, in summer, regarding arts and culture, the importance was recognized, but as the lives of human people, I did not get the impression that the governor was that enthusiastic about arts and culture back then. And last year, at the Aichi Triennale, I held an exhibition on the freedom of expression, what next? And there were some parts that were difficult to discuss, but Governor Omura, he has been upholding the freedom of art. And in holding his support, he's been making the right decisions, I think. And art caused a big commotion out there in society. And then there was COVID-19. And the necessity of arts and culture started to be discussed. So the value of culture, or the sense of distance between culture and politics, or the independence, or the need for support, over the past year, culture and politics. Regarding the value of culture, personally, I think you had more opportunities to think about this, and the past year has been very eventful. So how do you look back over the past year? Yes, like you said, Mr. Tsuda, I agree with you. But having said so, I think 3 years ago you were the artistic director, and I met you for the first time and we chatted. And that was the Aichi Triennale, an arts festival, and I was also the chair of the execution committee. And the Aichi Arts Center, as the representative of Aichi Prefecture, as part of my job, I had the chat with you. That was as far as I'd got 3 years ago. And from a year ago, from summer, in that way, there was the big debate over the Aichi Triennale. And based on that, it's true. Regarding arts and culture, I've thought about it a lot and actually taken action. And before that, maybe I didn't go that far. However, my deep feelings are, going forward, regarding the future of Japan, of Japanese society, where you think about the future, not just of Japan, but of the whole world, we politicians have to think about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ahead, show the vision and do our work. I constantly feel this. And digitization is moving forward, globalization is moving forward, AI is moving forward. But what are the true ways of human beings and the way they live? So how should people work? How should they act? What should they do to be of use to development of mankind? 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I was already thinking about this, and personally, in a variety of places. I have the opportunity to speak at a lot of places. And what I always say is, going forward, what kind of human resources are necessary? What kind of education needs to be done for them to be useful in 10 years, 20 years' time? And what I often said was, digitization will move forward. So people who can utilize digital technologies, of course, are necessary. And on the other hand, computers, AI, but there are things they cannot do, and that's art and communication, which is what human beings are good at. So emotionally moving people can only be done by people, and it's the power of arts and culture. And I've been saying that for a long time. In that respect, the actions of people, that's arts and culture. And we need to make sure we value that. Since the Heisei era, Japan's economic powers have been declining. 30 years ago, our GDP per capita was #1 in the world. And we were told that if you want to have a good economy, look at Japan. But that alone is not enough. The country Japan, and society needs to be considered necessary from the world, needs to be respected. And Japan, we need the world to feel that Japan is necessary. So Japanese art and Japanese culture, and what the Japanese have been doing in the past and what the Japanese will be doing in the future, we need to have arts and culture so we can communicate that to the rest of the world. And with COVID-19, countries, as Professor Sano was saying earlier on, borders are closing and people are not allowed to cross borders internally. Domestically, now we can move around, but people are being told to stay home. And people's movements are being restricted. But now is the time for people to be human. And the actions, the lives of people is art. And like the minister said, we need to create solidarity. And in that way, arts and culture are going to become even more necessary than before. I have an extra question. And it's a bit difficult for me to ask the governor. At the Aichi Triennale, and there was the after freedom of expression, and it flared up. And the minister was saying, art has the power to heal people, to comfort people, but it can also be very challenging, provoking for society, or it can split people up. And that could be the opportunity for debate. And that's something that should not be seen negatively. That's what the minister was saying. And Aichi Triennale 2019, it did have that aspect. And of course, Governor Omura, as the chair of the committee, organizing committee, I'm sure it's very difficult for you, but it's not just the after freedom of expression. It was very political. So politically, socially, there were questions thrown out there, a lot of artwork that was doing that. And in the Asahi Shimbun interview, you were saying the Aichi Triennale was worth seeing. So regarding contemporary art, it's difficult to control. For the administration, it's probably difficult to control what we put on show. But how did you feel about that? It's true for the Triennale, and there are a variety of exhibitions that I've seen. I've had the opportunity to see a lot of different exhibitions, and there are a lot of different works. That's true. There are a lot of different opinions. That's true too. And regarding the individual works of art, I have no intention of saying this is good and this is bad. I need to refrain from doing that as a politician. However, regarding contemporary art too, in the past, regarding art, music, a variety of culture and arts, mankind has lived for a long time, for hundreds and thousands of years. And in the past, there are the existing concepts. And it shouldn't just be an extension of the past. There are those that exist, what we have now, the values, the concepts, but we need to challenge them. We need to try to refute them, and that leads to new art. That's what art has taught us. So arts and culture, of course, and globally, with COVID-19, activities are not stopped, but slowing down a little bit. But starting with Silicon Valley, startup companies are appearing in various cities across the world and is acting as the engine for societies across the world. Silicon Valley and Shenzhen in China, I think those are all acting as engines. So trying things out, challenging, will lead to the growth of mankind and society.
And so arts and culture should also take on new challenges. That, in a way, is one characteristic of arts and culture. And that is how I myself see it. On the other hand, though, as the governor of Aichi Prefecture, as a member of the administration, I also have a responsibility to make sure that exhibitions are carried out smoothly. And so I do need to maintain a good balance between the two. And that's what I always keep in mind as I go about my activities. Professor Sano, we heard some insightful comments from Governor Omura. And Professor, you also have done a lot of research on expos and exhibitions like the Triennale or Biennales in Japan. That has helped to stimulate the economy and have economic impact, and that has gained a lot of attention. But then you start to see politicians talk about these festivals of almost as if these were tools to get more audiences. And that's why they tend to want to give a lot of opinion on what that content should be. We see a lot of politicians tending to be that. But compared to then, Governor Omura does keep a sort of distance from trying to get into that discussion. He does pay a lot of respect to the context of arts and culture. So, Professor Sano, what was your take on Governor Omura's comments? Well, I'm really happy to get the opportunity to talk to Governor Omura. And I'd really like to ask him, before and after the Aichi Triennale, what changed? Did that controversy promote you to really think about arts and culture? So how did things change before and after that Triennale? And the ideals that you have talked about are things that I really resonate with. There are various artistic festivals since year 2000. We've seen lots of festivals crop up in Japan. But they have mostly been with the purpose of trying to stimulate the local economy. And it is an extension of what we have been focusing on in Japan. That itself does have meaning. I do not mean to completely negate that. But it's part of stimulating the local economy, maybe too much focused on trying to get tourism more active. And last year, people in general got to know more about the Aichi Triennale. We started to see that local economic stimulation was not the only function of art and culture. In a sense that is different from stimulating the local economy. It did provide food for thought for many people. So the artistic festival prompted us to think about it. By getting exposed to art, people get ideas that they would not have had otherwise. People get to think about the meaning of their own existence. They get to think about how they interact with other people. They get to see new possibilities. And I think that event has been an opportunity for us to think about it. And so that artistic festival had a kind of power. And I do want various local communities to be competing with each other on how powerful their festivals are. Now, I myself visited the Aichi Triennale during the time where the After Freedom of Expression exhibit was closed, and it was before reopening. And so I did not get to see that particular exhibition. What I found really disappointing is that the Aichi Triennale was seen in the eyes of public as just being about this After Freedom of Expression exhibit, and that exhibit was only a small part of the entire festival. And my honest impression was the artistic festival was very accepting of different beliefs. It tried to encompass a lot of different positions, a lot of different ideas, and it tried to have a dialogue with those different perspectives. There are many exhibitions that just present a perspective and say, if you don't understand it, fine. But I believe that the Triennale was a festival that tried to have a dialogue going. And it's a pity that that entire concept of the festival was never discussed much in public. But I do hope that will be a trigger for us to get more and more festivals that prompt us to think. Thank you, Professor Sano. So I feel very encouraged as artistic director to hear that. And you said that the festival was very accepting of different ideals. We did have a lot of discussion internally. Who is this art for? We wanted to get a lot of people to see the art. We thought that contemporary art had a lot of power to reach out to people. We wanted a lot of people to be able to enjoy that. And we wanted to think of ways to really realize the concept. So we tried to create the captions for the artwork together with the creative team, and we tried to make the explanations as easy to understand as possible so that even teenagers would be able to understand it. I go to a lot of contemporary art exhibitions, and there are exhibitions that do not explain much. It leaves a lot to the interpretation of the one who sees the art. And so people who love art do go to those exhibitions, but it poses a barrier to those people who feel intimidated by that kind of thing. And so I do have some very complicated feelings about that event. But what I am really proud of the festival, and I do feel bad about having created a lot of bad feelings in some people, but I think it has been a successful festival. It has been a festival that has been successful financially as well. Artistic events usually do not attract many people. Some people say that festivals do not help the economy, it doesn't help society. But by having a festival that has a unique characteristic and one that is successful commercially could become a model for the future. I do not think that every Triennale festival should be like that, but I think it's meaningful that we were able to present a model that could be meaningful for the artistic world 10, 20 years in future. Yes, I really feel the same way with you on that. We've been discussing the art festival and how you run the art festival, how you support art. Is a theme that I'm always thinking of. And I'm actually advocating a big cultural support policy, a cultural policy. And that's because we need to create a society that can encompass all of those different artistic things. Just taking out the cultural promotion part of policy is not enough. Governor Omura said that all service industries are getting hit by the coronavirus and they are being impacted economically. And they are almost hanging on a cliff. And he said there are all these industries that need help. So all of these adjacent industries, for instance, education and other areas, those should all be included in thinking how we should shape Japanese society. That entire thing should be thought of as a cultural policy. And I think it's important to have that perspective.
So people talk about art policy, or how should we hold art festivals and cut that out and discuss it. But society, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, what will it be like? And actually, it's not just the surrounding areas, but the people's lives in general, and their daily lives, the way they think, how enriched do they feel? And their lifestyles overall should be the target of cultural policy. And I'm sorry, I said big cultural policy, and I don't know how the interpreters interpreted that, but people talk about big governments, but it's not the same kind of big. It's not like the government does everything. That's not what I meant. I meant with a large scope, with, I wanted to say, a broader cultural policy. And it's not urban planning, it's not industrial promotion, it's not educational policy. So all of those policy that's not all of those should not be cultural policy. You should be able to see things from a broad perspective, and that's where support should be. But in that way, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, in 100 years' time, promoting society, helping it grow, can't we have that kind of perspective regarding cultural policy? And that will be a true cultural nation. I think that kind of thing is necessary. And for human beings, what is most important for human beings? With COVID-19, we're starting to see this. And I think we can all try to agree and try to value arts and culture more. Yes, Governor Omura, these kinds of broad cultural policies. So I'm sure you want to talk a lot about this. It's not just art. In Aichi Prefecture, there are a lot of things that are really good. Like manufacturing, you have that industry, and computers, high-tech, AI, things like that. And things like education, industry, the automotive industry, they're all closely linked, as well as arts and culture. So, Aichi Prefecture, what do you want to do with Aichi Prefecture? What's your 100-year grand vision? And I think arts and culture becomes important in thinking about that. So this is a really big, broad initiative, and I'm sure you have one already. So listening to Professor Sano, what did you think, Governor? Yes, big or broad cultural policies, I agree with you. The individual arts and culture, as a genre, there's arts and culture activities, but not that. As I've been talking a lot about human beings and their actions, their lives, the big and broad. In the country, the way you grasp this is culture, I think. I think that's the best way to put that. I agree with you. And it's not just Aichi. It's the path that Japan needs to take. It's the direction that Japan needs to take. With COVID-19, right now, borders are going up, people are not allowed to move around, and only gradually activities are starting to resume. But in time, I think that there'll be a vaccine, there'll be a cure. We do have technologies advancing rapidly, so in the very near future, I think we'll have those. And it's true, people are working remotely, online, and those will become more deeply rooted and accepted in society. But I am certain that people-to-people communication, people coming and going, will come back. And globalization cannot be stopped. Therefore, in that respect, I think it's going to come back. And when that happens, the direction that Japan needs to go in is how can we attract human resources and new society, new technologies, new products, new economic activities, new social activities? How can we create these? It all depends on that. A typical example would be the US, Silicon Valley, GAFA, or China's national capitalism, Shenzhen, Shanghai, and the IT companies. Of course, we have the Japan #1 auto manufacturing and technological capabilities. I think that Aichi's auto industry is globally #1. I've always been very confident in saying that boldly. We are globally #1. I think our automotive industry is second to none, but we need to make it evolve even further. And in that respect, we need to attract human resources from across the world. And startups. Startup companies need to be born. We need to encourage them. In the future, that's what Aichi needs to do, and that's what Japan needs to do as a direction. And when that happens, a key word, I think, will be arts and culture. Last year in August, with Germany and France, I visited Germany and France related to startups. I was trying to create a network I went to Berlin and Paris. In Paris, I went to Station F. It's said to be the most successful startup base in the world. And this year in January too, right before COVID-19, I went to Paris again. And there were offers from all over the world, but they said no to all of them. And they'd be willing to cooperate if it were Aichi. They refused all the others, but Aichi, yes. And I went to Berlin too. In Berlin, the Berlin state government, and I went to the economic promotion entity. I saw the startups, and to be honest, I never knew that Berlin was such a center for startups. I went there August last year. I never knew before. I knew about Silicon Valley in the US, and I thought maybe Paris, London, but Berlin. And I think Berlin perhaps is more ahead of the others, and I was saying why? One is the rent's cheap, the real estate is cheap, but other than that, Berlin was saying it's the art. In Berlin, they have art. They have a lot of it. And creative human resources, or human resources that are willing to make the challenge, are attracted to Berlin. And the Berlin state government's person sounded really proud as he said that. From that perspective, too, we need to attract people. We need to make them want to come here, and it's the power of arts and culture that does that. So, arts and culture, art, should be deeply rooted in the area. That's the kind of region I'd like to create, not just Aichi, but for the whole of Japan. That's the direction that we need to aim for. Professor Sano, regarding what the governor just said, so this is city policy or urban policy. And with cultural policy, Germany is a typical example, but the cultural policy, the central government will not chip in, and it's the state that has the budget and moves it forward. So this is like urban policy. And through culture, you want to attract people to your city. I think maybe one reason is there's that aspect. But with urban policy, what do you think of cultural policy and the direction that the governor is aiming for? What did you think? Yes, the central government, well, in the case of Japan, there's the central government, there's the local governments, and there are various levels of local governments that are all coming up with policies. I'd like them to do that. In Germany, the state level is strong, so in Japan too, maybe that would be good. That's not what I'm saying. With various different units doing a lot of different things, and of course, not sticking their nose in. That's the big basic premise. They will provide the funds, but not their opinions. I think getting that style accepted widely is important. And turning to urban policy, when you think about cultural policy, which is similar to urban policy, and of course, arts and culture needs to be at the core and needs to flourish at the center of it, but not looking at only that, but looking at the whole town, how to develop the whole town, and as cultural policy, looking at it as a whole. And what the governor just said regarding nurturing human resources, I think that in a nutshell tells all. And I too agree with that.
And so we are now at a point where, with the coronavirus pandemic, the people who provide an art may change to different people. So you're saying that people who are struggling right now, artists may give up? Well, that too. And that's a sad part of this story. But in the past, there were people who were supported, there were freelancers, there were people who worked almost like a freelancer. And yes, an emergency package, we do need to support everyone. But going forwards in future, I think it's also important to allow new people to come in. I'm not saying that we should be forsaking the people who are currently in their business. I think that instead of saying we should allow people to go back to pre-corona levels, we have a real problem in front of us, like theaters not being able to have as many audience members as they used to. I think we're at a point where we need new ideas. We might be in a position to get new ideas, new things. And it may not be the same people who execute on those ideas. And it's not just for the people who create art or provide art. The same thing can be said for people who appreciate art, who are the recipients of art. When I was small, I really loved going to the theater, and any free time I got, I would try to go to the theater. It's such a crowded place with lots of people. I love that atmosphere. But I'm thinking that in future, as the theaters try to resume operations with less crowded spaces, I'm not sure if I would love that kind of atmosphere. But for maybe there will be new fans who like the less crowded places. And there's a lot of content distributed online for free, to the extent that you get worried if they can get by. Maybe those free videos may prompt new people to come and enjoy art. So we may start to see a new band of fans coming in. There may be a change in the audience as well. And so we should see that positively. We should be supporting them. In the past, people would say, how has your past performance been? Are you earning less than you used to? Yes, we do need to provide emergency support. But in future, we do need to create space for new people to also come in and participate. And as we do that, we get back to the point of creating a urban city for people to be living a very human life. And so I think we can turn the coronavirus situation in a positive way. Professor Sano, part of the package that Aichi Prefecture has to support artists is they increase the budget to support young artists. And so they selected 30 young artists to purchase their work. I thought that was quite a new policy for a government and local government in Japan. It could be a new way of doing things. It really did stand out. And what did you think about it? Well, it was already mentioned today. Each local government is announcing a lot of different measures, but I thought Aichi Prefecture was very interesting. And I was looking forward to hearing more in detail about it today, and I'm very happy I got the opportunity to do so. I think this is a wonderful idea, purchasing the works of artists. I'd encourage you to do more and more of it. So I'm not sure how many of the works will get into the category of contemporary art, but I would urge you to do this in a borderless manner. Don't be stuck by categories. Omura-san, what is your take on it? Well, as to what kind of art we purchase, we leave it to the experts to decide. And so there's a lot of planning going on. We've talked to a lot of people. And from July, we're going to be starting to actually purchase the works. So young people, we mean artists from their 20s up to their 40s, and it will be contemporary art from artists who currently live in Japan. It encompasses a lot of things like video and sculptures and paintings and etc. And for this fiscal year, we've selected 30 artists. And next year, another 30. And that will be about 60% of what we plan to do. We do hope to be continuing this initiative in future. And because we are in times like this, arts and culture, especially for the Aichi Prefectural Museum of Art and the Modern Museum, we do have a policy of trying to enrich the artworks that they own. And because we are in times like this, I think we should step one step further to put more effort into this initiative. So how do you allocate cultural budgets? This is a difficult question that has no right answer. On one hand, you see this particularly in Osaka. Sometimes cultural budgets are part of a political performance. It's very easy to be cutting off budget. It's easy to be merging or streamlining museums, and it's easy to say that we should stop doing concerts. It's easy for people to cut off cultural budget. And that's why in politics it's really important to think of a vision of how you allocate cultural budgets. So Governor Omura, for instance, there's the Ghibli Museum, and there are a lot of museums and other art programs. You also have film festivals, when you have subculture programs, and you have the Aichi Triennale, which does focus on contemporary art. And so that's one of the interesting things about the art scene in Aichi. So how do you plan to appropriately allocate the cultural budget for all of these things? I do not think there's a right answer. It's very difficult to say it should be one way or the other, because many people have different opinions. We do have an overall budget, though, and so I need to make sure we maintain a balance. We need to pay attention to a lot of different genres. we in our position are tasked with making sure we maintain that balance. And I've been saying this consistently. Arts and culture is really a human activity. It's what we do in society and as humans. And so we need a lot of different talent, a lot of different human resources to come to Japan and Aichi. I think it's important for people to live here and be active here. We have a lot of different things like tourism, and no matter what your purpose is, we do want people to come to Aichi and conduct a lot of different activities. Maybe that would generate new activities, that would generate new culture. It will create new economic activities, or it can be anything. I think with the coronavirus stopping the mobility of people, I'm sure that humankind will be able to come up with vaccines and treatments in order to overcome this crisis. And so as we start to move about and interact more, people can meet other people, conduct activities, and their communities and economies and the culture could all grow. So I really want people to come and have exchanges with each other. I want to create a platform for that. And one of the pillars to do that would be arts and culture. Professor Sano, based on what we just heard, when you talk about cultural policies, well, I used to be a journalist who covers the music industry. And for the past 15 years, I've been keeping track of cultural policies.
And at the risk of being rude, I'm following this, but cultural policy is not flamboyant. And society doesn't really pay attention to cultural policy. But with COVID-19, cultural policies, social necessity is coming into the limelight. I think more people are paying attention to this. And Professor Sano, you were saying that COVID-19 is serving as the trigger for things to change for the better. There's a potential for things to improve. With COVID-19, so arts and culture is taking a big hit. However, there's the possibility of this turning positive, and what cultural policy can do and the impact it can get, there's lots of possibilities. What do you think? Yes. In a nutshell, right at the beginning, this is what I mentioned at the beginning, but from a long-term perspective, we need to see things from a long-term perspective when we think about cultural policy. For example, Governor Omura, as his personal strong will, he was saying something that I could agree to 100%. He was saying it's the actual lives of the people, the actions of the people that creates culture. That is culture. And I think he understands culture very well. After listening to him, that's how I feel. How should I put this? Every year, reflecting that in the budget every year is difficult, I think. But having said so, as part of that, the cultural policy sector, there are a lot of restrictions, but constantly having a long-term perspective and looking back after 100 years, looking back to the present day from 100 years ahead, thinking from that perspective, you need to try to nurture arts and culture, and you need to exert your capabilities. Right now, Mr. Tsuda was saying that cultural policy is not glamorous, but it's not that people didn't pay attention to us. Cultural policy itself, and I think I mentioned this in the beginning, at the risk of being repetitive, Europe is good, Japan is no good. And it's very difficult for Japan to free itself from that way of thinking. And what about recent history? In the history of society, so far, the democratic society that we have managed to build and manage to maintain? Do we want to let go or do we want to keep it? The perspective of actually thinking that, I think that was lacking from the cultural policy sector. And looking at things from a historical perspective and thinking about history in the future, looking back from 100 years into the future, looking back at today. So asking historians 100 years in the future how they would evaluate today, thinking about cultural policy from that perspective, that's necessary. And cultural policy, I think it should be anthropology. It should be looking at things from that perspective and trying to move society. I think that's what cultural policy should be as a humanity. So the politicians with a lot of restrictions, not having that perspective, and looking back from 100 years into the future, looking back to this age of COVID-19, how did we overcome it? And how did people exert their leadership? From that perspective, I would like the policymakers to try to be cool in that kind of respect. Try to look cool from 100 years into the future when people look back. If you could please come up with your cultural policy from that perspective. Thank you. Regarding Professor Sano's comment, it's related to this. And this is a question that we got from one of our listeners, and I'd like both of our members to answer the question. So what Aichi is trying to do, there's a lot of things Aichi can do through cultural policy, and it looks very interesting. But the issues, so there are people who try new things, people who challenge and try new things, but the people who evaluate them, there's a shortage of people who can evaluate them. And when we choose who to offer support to, it's difficult making the choice. What do you think of that issue? Related to the Aichi Triennale, there's a panel of experts, and we'll have the experts make the decision in the future. So Governor Omura, regarding the ones who do the evaluation and regarding who to support, what do you think? Yes, that is a difficult issue. I agree. So people evaluate people. And who evaluates? Who has the qualifications to make the appropriate evaluations? That's very difficult. It's okay to have diverse art. And a lot of different people should look at it from this way, that way, and the other way. Like Tsuda-san said, Arts Council and Advisors Panel is being set up. And experts in arts and culture can properly, from a variety of aspects, hold their discussions. I think that is necessary. Professor Sano, what do you think? Yes. I question the concept of experts. The concept of experts itself can be used as a cloak to hide behind. For this to truly function properly, I think that the barriers are extremely high. In particular, the next generation art forms, art expressions, to choose them, who should be the experts who choose the next generation art expressions? And is it people who have studied art history? In many cases, it's that, or people who are considered to be arts and cultural policy, but in that sector alone. I question that those are the only people who are doing the choosing. And one thing I can say is, in some countries, there's something that's working. So it's not just learning from outside Japan, but I think that a certain kind of peer review should be introduced. The people who are out there on the front lines, the creators, people of the same generation or people who have experience, these artists should take turns and come into the selection process so that mutually you can create this world. So having something like academic, we should not have academic people to choose the artists. We should have the artists be more liquid and move around. We need to have that kind of mechanism, I think. Right, thank you. I think we are starting to run out of time. So lastly, from both of our participants, maybe we could have a comment from each of you and end this session. So Minister Brosda's VTR, I'd like to come back to the video, the interview. Towards the end, he was saying arts and culture have great power, but they're also under threat. That's what the minister was saying. One thing is there's the economic framework. Without money, arts and culture cannot exist. And another thing is the political ideology. It's becoming a place for that kind of conflict, especially contemporary art. There's the right wing that's trying to attack contemporary art. And the third thing is identity politics, so-called discrimination or minorities, and trying to express their voices in art. There are a variety of perspectives which make it difficult to express freely. There's constantly tension. For artistic and cultural expression, we're constantly being put to the test. It's not just art. It's probably the same for music and drama and for the other forms as well. And right now, in the United States, Gone with the Wind is no longer being distributed. And we should add a contemporary explanation and then redistribute it. It's not just in Japan, but all over the world. These kinds of contents. It's not freedom of expression, but we need to think about how we express. I think those are the times that we are entering. So I'd like to ask both of you. The minister was saying it's not a discussion over freedom, arts and culture for society. Is it truly being fair? I think that's what he was pointing out. So who should evaluate who? That's difficult, and it's related to that.
And so I think in the end, it's a discussion of what will happen to the public nature of art and culture. So I know I'm throwing out a huge topic at the end of this session, but in the times that we are living in, by supporting arts and culture properly, how could it impact the public nature of the arts and culture in Japan? It's difficult for us in Japan to understand that. If you could show a big vision for that as we wrap up. Governor Omura, could I ask you to speak first? Yes, I completely agree with what was said. And with the current coronavirus situation, borders are closed, people cannot move beyond borders. And we ourselves asked people to stay home during the past month. Now, we have had 0 positive cases identified in the past week in Aichi, and so we are starting to do a lot of new things. So we have been refraining from allowing more exchange of activity recently, but we need to get activity back again, and we need to be reconnecting people, and getting more solidarity working, as Minister Brosda said. I think arts and culture does have the power to build solidarity. Even before the coronavirus, the world was dealing with a divided society. And people were getting disconnected from each other. They did not see eye to eye on issues. So I think, once again, we should try to connect people, reconnect them. Get a society where we can respect the value of others, the difference or diversity of others, because that will fuel the power of arts and culture. You mentioned the word public. I think arts and culture are a public asset that connects people together. Arts and culture are equal to human activity, what people do, from really long times ago. It has been what humans have been doing all along. And so I am sure that humankind will overcome the coronavirus crisis. And after we overcome that, arts and culture will help us to reconnect. So we are working with putting an all-out effort into battling the coronavirus situation, but that's what I think. Thank you, Governor Omura. Professor Sano, the role of arts and culture in the coronavirus situation and also the public nature of it, what do you think? Yes, so who are the people who are involved in arts and culture firsthand? Well, Minister Brosda says that art can inspire and unite. It can also split people up. I think we should all become aware of that nature of art. There's no guarantee that you can always unite or create solidarity through arts and culture, because sometimes that can be an illusion. It could be very dangerous to assume that it can unite. Maybe sometimes you are not fully understanding the other person's position. So I think we should all learn humility. And I think Minister Brosda mentioned how majority groups would be showing solidarity with minority groups. And I think that's a huge topic on its own, so maybe I should not get into that discussion. But I think that discussion does have a little bit of a risk, because there are systems of expression and systems that the majority groups have. And in many cases, people have tried to talk about solidarity, focusing more on how the majority group wants to do it. So we should really think about the discourse. We should also remind ourselves that maybe it's not working as we had hoped it would be. There's no right answer to this. But I do think society may change drastically in the next 100 years. And we should be aware of all of the risks that come with it. And with that in mind, we should be sharing arts and culture, and it will be a huge asset for us in the future. Thank you, Professor Sano. So I think we've had a real deep discussion. And through the coronavirus situation, cultural policies and supporting arts and culture has become under the spotlight. But a lot of this support has been provided in the past, and in the first part of Studio 202X in this series, we've also been talking about the policies that we would hope would be in place. And we come back to that same theme in this last session. And I believe that today's discussion was exceptional, because we've had practical politicians actually involved in cultural policy in Germany and Japan, getting together with an expert in the academic side. I've never seen that kind of a session happen before. And I'm really grateful to Goethe-Institut for creating this opportunity. And the fact that this will remain in the archives means that this will prove to be a very important reference material in future. So the video of today's session will be available for viewing on the archives. If you want to watch it again, please do so when you have time. And so we've done 4 parts of Series 1, 4 parts of Series 2. And Series 1 and Series 2 were both very well received. And so if we get a lot of response this time, we may plan for a future 3rd series. I hope we do. And I really hope that I get an opportunity to talk more about cultural policies in future. Governor Omura, Professor Sano, thank you very much for staying us until late at night. Thank you. And with that, the second series, part 4 of Studio 202X is wrapping up. I do sort of feel that we might be coming back again for another series, and so I hope to see you all again in future. Good night.